Hi there. Find yourself a comfortable space, take some time for yourself, and join me, Siobhan McLean, for a slice of supervision. So thank you for joining me today, Jo and Florence, to talk about neuro-inclusive supervision. I'm actually really excited that this is one of the slices that we're going to do because it's such an important topic. And actually, in terms of the training that I do on supervision, people are clearly picking up that this is something they want to do because I'm being asked a lot about training on neuro-inclusive supervision, so I think it's something that is, a really significant topic for people now, which I'm really pleased about that it's coming to the forefront, if you like. If I could ask you first of all to introduce yourselves. I'm Siobhan. I'm not going to introduce myself because otherwise every slice has this. So I'm just going to say I've been a social worker for 35 years. Actually, though, what I might say in this session that I don't say in previous sessions is that I am now neurodivergent. I have an acquired neurodivergence post-stroke, and I think that has given me lots more maybe understanding of issues around neurodiversity. So, Florence, we've worked together before, so I'll go straight to you and ask you to introduce yourself if that's okay.
Thank you, Siobhan. So I'm Florence. I am a neurodivergent social worker, also a practice educator. I'm multiply neurodivergent, so ADHD, autistic, dyslexic, and dyspraxic. And I also am co-director of a company called Neuro-Inclusive Solutions. So we work with social work organisations around developing neuro-inclusive practices and just trying to upskill social workers as much as possible and social work managers on how we can create neuro-inclusive spaces. And then I've been working with the wonderful Jo on a book chapter around neuro-inclusive supervision.
Fabulous. So, Jo, other than us meeting to discuss this, we've not worked together before, but would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. I'm Jo. I'm a social worker by profession and have worked in social work and social care for over 30 years now, mostly with children and families, and a passion of mine all the way through my professional life and history has been supervision and good social work supervision. What do we mean by that? And in recent years, I've been thinking more deeply about what it means to be a good reflective supervisor. In terms of neurodiversity, I would describe myself usually as neurotypical. Probably I wouldn't usually describe myself at all, but in this context, however, having said that, over the years, I've wondered about myself in terms of dyslexia, and certainly in the menopause years, has started to wonder about other things. And meeting Florence and writing together has been an education for me, and it's made me really think about myself and think about perhaps the whole sort of spectrum of neurodiversity and where we all might fit within that. So it's just very interesting to think about yourself through that lens. So that's me.
I think that's just fascinating as well, Jo, the way you introduce yourself there, because I've thought for a long time that actually many women become much clearer and about their own maybe neurodivergence through the menopause because of, all of the things that happen to us. I think it's a really fascinating connection, and actually one that really does come into supervision as well, doesn't it? Because I often think, and I know when I was kind of at the height of the impact of the menopause for me, and I don't want to make this a supervision in the menopause session, but I often thought about the fact that there was me, a 23-year-old social worker, supervising two mental health support workers with years and years of experience who were both probably going through the menopause at the time. And I had absolutely no consciousness and no idea, and probably really didn't provide great supervision for them. And I often thought about that at that point. So I think, making sure that supervision is really tailored to people's unique circumstances and situation.
Yeah.
And how things change for people over time as well is also really important, isn't it? So we've not scripted this, and I've not scripted any of the supervision slices because I feel like, well, supervision isn't scripted, or certainly shouldn't be scripted. It should just be really, if you're a social worker, you should be able to hold those thoughtful conversations and think about depth and be able to use questions and so on. So, I don't know really. I suppose it's about where do we start, but you've clearly been developing a model and some reflective questions around neuro-inclusive supervision. So, I don't know who would like to start off explaining that to us. I'll leave it to you. Who's going to go first in terms of telling us about what the work you've been doing together?
Absolutely. I don't mind jumping in here. So I have been working with quite a few neurodivergent social work students. I think as soon as I've kind of been loud and proud about being neurodivergent, I am paired to work with neurodivergent students. And in our supervisory spaces, we've have been reflecting over time around kind of what does it feel like in supervision as a neurodivergent social worker, and been reflecting on that within my own practice. And from this, I have been working to develop a model on how can we create kind of brave and safe spaces for neurodivergent supervisees. And then Jo and I have been working together to kind of publish this and to get it out as much as possible. So the supervision model is based on the what, so what, and now what model, looking at kind of individual need, impact on practice, and actually what resources can we draw into that. And I've been drawing on Jo's a wealth of knowledge around supervisory alliances and relationships, and actually the foundation that relationships have within supervision, and how we can use these relationships to get to know supervisees as individuals, because we're all really unique with our beautiful fingerprints, and every different person comes into that space with intersecting characteristics where we need to kind of tailor our approaches as much as possible.
I love that idea of brave and safe places. We talk a lot about safety and supervision, but I really like that idea of bravery and, courage is really important in supervision. As a supervisor, I know often I need to have really courageous conversations. And I think, on both sides, we need to bring some courage into those spaces. So brave spaces, I love that concept. I think it's fabulous. So. And Jo, I know you've done a lot of work on relationships in supervision, and that being your kind of area. So I can see the way in which, Florence has just taken us into that. So do you want to say any more about that or any more about the model?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm really interested. I've been interested for some time in the psychosocial and emotional landscape of supervision practice, and sort of seeing the relationship as a vehicle for practice, and for good practice, but also, yeah, just thinking and being curious about what happens when we get into a relationship with someone at work,
Mm.
and what of ourself comes to the fore. How do we maximize that? How do we take account for the nuanced differences in us, or what might be created if we don't see sameness and difference as well. Yeah, and how do we go about doing that? So we know theoretically and from everything that's been written about supervision that the supervision agreement process is really an important cornerstone to practice. But how do we have that as an ongoing sort of reflective tool and working agreement as we go on in our relationships with people and as we learn more about people? So certainly since I've started this dialogue with Florence and learnt a lot more about neurodivergence, it's made me then really think about my supervisees. So I work as an independent supervisor, and I supervise several people, and it's made me start to think about them in a different way. So it's given me the opportunity to say, I've been thinking more about neurodiversity. What sense of that do you make about yourself? Let's think
Mm.
about that together.
Mm. I mean, I think relationships are so important. And one of the things that strikes me is sometimes, and I don't know if you've experienced this through the organization that you're co-directing, Florence, but one of the things that strikes me is sometimes local authorities or other large employers of social workers will come forwards and say, can we have a tool then for neuro-inclusive supervision? As though it's a kind of, here's a magic wand.
Mhm.
But actually, the relational stuff is missing. I've just had a meeting this morning with a local authority where they were saying, well, there's been so much change recently, and managers are not there for very long, and supervisors are not there. And so many social workers will say to you, the person that supervises me in 3 months' time, I'll have a different supervisor and then another supervisor. And I think that's a really big issue at the moment, so how do we address that, I suppose, is a really starting point before we can even get to good quality supervision, is about keeping people in place, isn't it? But
Absolutely, and sometimes keeping people in place can happen with a neuro-inclusive approach to practice as well. Often like visibility. So if we are having kind of a high turnover of managers and we don't get that kind of consistent relationship and support through management, having spaces such as almost special interest groups. So having like a disability or neurodiversity network within the organisation where you can build those consistent relationships with peers in that space. Because there's something around peer supervision, I think, that's really important too, and being able to go to your fellow neurodivergent colleagues and ask around what are their experience, what's worked for them, and actually how have they approached conversations around reasonable adjustments or approached conversations around disclosure, where it's kind of tried and tested in the organisation and not necessarily needing to go to a manager. But myself and Jenny, we do experience the exact same as you, Siobhan, of what model of practice can we apply to this? And it's actually a lot messier than that, beautifully messy, don't get me wrong, but we have to approach every single person individually, especially when we think of neurodivergence and the overlap of different neurotypes. Every person is different. And then you've got difference within organisations. So it becomes one big, messy Venn diagram that we end up working with. So we always kind of preach as much as possible of approach every situation as individually as possible.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Do you have any other thoughts, Jo, on just that fundamental relational work that we do? Or
Well, I mean, I'm really interested by what you've both said, and it's made me think about sometimes questions I might get asked about anti-racist supervision. And I've always said if you can do really good anti-racist supervision, you can do good supervision. And that's the same with this. So it isn't about having a model that puts people in boxes or allows you to just do some sort of formula or some sort of algorithm to work out what someone needs. It's about the essence of the relationship and curiosity and continuing to keep an open mind and modeling something about vulnerability, which enables us to be braver and creating that. And I think something I've really started noticing when I've looked at the data from my own doctoral studies, I've been looking at that recently. Trust is a really, really big, important thing in the supervision relationship. And I've started to notice that where there's a two-way trust, people can be more reflective together and more relaxed and more vulnerable, and take braver decisions. And that's the supervisor as well as the supervisee. So it all does come back down to that essence of relationship, really. I think our model is a really helpful steer. It's got lots of helpful questions, but there is a danger that you could just rattle through those as a checklist, and somebody with a particular way of thinking would be confused by the questions as well. So I think it's all quite experimental. I think in my teaching, I try and encourage people to think about a lot of the work we do. It's quite experimental. It might not work, or it might work, might go wrong. Let's just try, really.
But I suppose that's the fundamental nature of social work, isn't it? That what we do as social workers is relational. What we do as social workers is uniquely tailor things for the individual that we're working with. We work with curiosity. We recognize that things might not work and we might need to adapt our approach. So all of those things we can take into supervision. There's so many transferable social work skills that come into the supervisory role.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether I don't know, these are maybe just my thoughts, but sometimes I think people take their social work skills into supervision rather than in that way that I've just described, in a way of saying, basically, they ask all the questions about the, I don't like the word, but the service user, just to be clear, use that word. And almost in a way, what it does is it communicates to the person they're supervising, I'm the expert, tell me about the person, I'll tell you how to solve the problem. And that's how they use their social work skills. They're kind of trying to social work the service user at the end of this conversation rather than drawing those social work skills into the supervisory forum, which is what I think, we should be doing, bringing those relational skills in. I suppose that's more my,
Yeah, I
yeah.
completely agree with that, Siobhan. And I think if supervisors can be brave and be good at that, it really models something about practice. It gives the supervisee an experience of relationship-based practice, and it enables them to be stronger in doing that with the families they work with. Um, we would think about that as parallel process. So it's
Yeah.
sort of deliberately modeling and deliberately being imperfect as well, I think is something else I'd want to just put in there
Yeah.
too. It's about how we model imperfection and the clunkiness of being human.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, do you
Mm.
want to tell us a bit about the model and share something of some of the questions, even, or would that be, again, I'm not sure who's best to do that and where we
Yeah,
start. I'll leave that with you.
absolutely no problem. I don't mind jumping in here. So as I mentioned earlier, it's based off of the what, so what, and now what. The what part is looking at actually who am I working with? What is the individual? And within this, we kind of break down identity. So looking at actually how would the supervisee describe themselves? How might we be alike? How might we be different as individuals? What should I know about you as a person? And asking questions like, if your loved ones were here, what advice might they give me on how to support you, or how might they describe you? So really trying to get to know the person that we're working with. And then the individual need is also looking at thinking and learning styles. So thinking about how would you describe how you think, communicate, or learn, and what helps your reflection, and how do you usually react to problems. And with the individual, we're also looking at support and supervision, and also the supervision environment for that individual. So asking questions to understand actually how would they like me to ask questions, or how would they like me to give feedback? So in that, really thinking about that rejection sensitivity dysphoria, sometimes feedback can feel really intimidating and feel like a criticism as opposed to feedback. So sometimes we can develop ways in which we feel comfortable with feedback, and in that it's also reflecting on those kind of good experiences of supervision, and experiences that have felt uncomfortable, and trying to understand, okay, what might that be, and what can we both bring together to that supervision space to make it feel as brave and safe as possible. And then thinking of the kind of practicalities for the individual, so thinking in terms of like sensory needs, so around lighting, noise. I know for one, in my early supervisory experiences as a student, finding actually sitting in a small room with that local authority kind of bright light that's flickering, and strong smells of coffee and perfume would be quite overwhelming. So actually just finding what that individual needs in that space. And I think here it's also really important to note that this can be a negotiation too. So especially me being someone who's neurodivergent and supervising someone who might be neurodivergent, just because we're both neurodivergent doesn't mean that we necessarily have similar needs. So sometimes ours might be conflicting, and it might be actually kind of problem solving around that of, okay, how can we meet both needs, or what do I need to do as a supervisor to make sure they can bring themselves to supervision while also keeping myself safe. So that's kind of individual need. I don't know if you want to add anything, Jo.
Um, no, I don't really. I mean, there's always something to add, isn't there? I suppose. I mean, one of my favourite questions is, how would I know when to worry about you? And I think that's just such a good generic question. Because I think that that helps somebody to highlight some of their difficulties or challenges, and what I might notice if they're stressed or uncomfortable or upset.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because we all demonstrate that differently, don't we? So
Yeah.
I love that question too. I think that's a great
And
question.
it gives you the chance as a supervisor to say how you might present yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really important to model that and show your human side. So yeah, if you notice that I get quite quiet and withdrawn, that's the sign that I'm stressed. I
Yeah.
don't always find it easy to ask for help and could become quite self-reliant.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I like that. Also, I just wanted to pick up, if it's all right, Florence, on what you were saying there about rejection sensitivity, because some people listening to the video or watching the video might not be aware of that as an issue around neurodivergence, you know? So I think for us as neurodivergent social workers, we can sort of just be very aware of that and what it is and what it means. But I find that some supervisors really don't have an understanding of the need to really tailor the way that we provide feedback. And I am definitely planning to do a supervision slice on how to provide feedback in supervision because it's so important. And we definitely, I think, in social work, take this kind of no news is good news approach. And then when we give feedback, it can be really quite harsh and quite, and so if your neurodivergence means that you do have that rejection sensitivity, I think it's really important. So I don't know if there's a little bit more you could say there, Florence, just for people who are not conscious of it and aware of it, what that might mean or look like, or why we might need to consider that as supervisors.
Absolutely. So, rejection sensitivity is kind of a negative emotional reaction to actual or perceived rejection. So, I'll give a few examples of what might be kind of perceived rejection, and I'll try and do it from student up to kind of qualified practitioner through lived experience. So, as a student social worker, we would write kind of reflective essays. At the university I went to, it was called central evidence documents, and sometimes the feedback on there, it probably was constructive, but it felt as though kind of that constructive criticism might have been Florence is failing, Florence isn't very good at this, where they might be picking up things around kind of spelling, grammar. I might not have understood the question fully. And the kind of internal talk was that actually my practice educator was saying, you're not good at this. But this was my brain reacting negatively to perceived rejection. And then in the workplace, it can be things like having a meeting put into your diary from your manager and just saying, oh, we need to catch up, and thinking, oh gosh, what have I done wrong? What on earth have I done on that visit? Or what was wrong with my assessment? Because it's not clear what the meeting is about, and there might not have been an agenda in there for me to fully understand the purpose of it. So for someone who has rejection sensitivity, it's thinking, oh, they're going to fire me, or here comes a complaint. And it can be in supervision as well, having feedback on kind of problem solving or casework, and feeling like you may have failed an individual that you're working with, or that imposter syndrome can come out and you think, oh, I shouldn't be in this space. But some of this is perceived as opposed to actual, and it can be based on our previous lived experiences of actually having negative feedback on how we present because we're neurodivergent, or where we think outside the box and think differently. Sometimes people don't understand our thought process and can challenge and question that. So those kind of past feelings can come into the present.
Mm. I do think it's really important that we understand that, and that the model that you've developed, asking people, how would you like to receive feedback? What's the best way for me to provide feedback? And I always do that because I think there are really all they ever teach you in supervision training is the feedback sandwich, and that's it. You don't really get all of the different techniques that there are, and there are so many different ways of providing feedback. And I do think it's really important that we explore that. And there's some that I find particularly helpful for people where there is rejection sensitivity, but with other people, they just won't work. So it is about finding the right way of providing feedback. And I think that is really important in terms of neuro-inclusive supervision. So I did just want to pick up on that one, really.
I think it's a really vital thing that you've picked up on, Siobhan. And I think it's just made me think about supervisees in general and all of us. I think that shame sits very heavily at the center of this, right under the surface, quite deeply for a lot of people, something that's even quite unconscious.
Mhm.
And so I think it is really thinking about how you can become the custodian of someone's shame, really, and think, okay, what does this person need in terms of what might get triggered for them, but also helping them to come sort of to a better understanding of that for some people. And I think it can be helpful again in the supervision agreement stage, but also at any other time to ask questions such as, if we needed to have a challenging conversation, what would be the best way for me to do that with you? What would be the most unhelpful way to do it?
Mhm.
Been your experiences in the past where somebody's done a good job of that?
Yeah.
What I notice about you if I might tap into shame that makes you freeze or stop being able to hear me?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, they're the bits about how we build those relationships with people and that,
Mm.
but this all takes time, doesn't it? It does take time. And this is one of the things that I wonder whether, local authorities, and I don't want to, scapegoat local authorities, but, other large employers of social workers, I suppose, um, whether they recognize the need for this and the investment, and rather than just, well, here, we've got a new policy and here's a new form that you need to fill in when you do supervision, without looking at some of these really huge fundamental underlying issues. Because everything we're talking about here isn't just about neuro-inclusive supervision. As you said, Joe, it's about good supervision generally, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Across the
And
board.
I think, again, I've been thinking about my research there, and what I noticed about the supervisors that are navigating that local authority space is that they are warriors of tenacity. They were all really tenacious and persistent and patient with their relationship building, and it needs like a repetitive, consistent,
Mhm.
tenacious approach. And so, yeah, you can have that conversation in one go, but it might become lost, and you might need to persist at that.
Yeah.
And that might feel uncomfortable in itself as well. So it's about, again, being willing to be brave and be willing to be rejected yourself if you might tap into something uncomfortable, but show the person that you're with them, beside them, and you're not going to give up.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I love that phrase, warriors of tenacity. That's a brilliant phrase.
I might use that as a subtitle. I've just came to my mind.
I'm really looking forward to reading this research. There's so many pearls of wisdom coming out in the things that you've told me about it. So fab. So do you want to tell us a bit more about the model, Florence, or
Yes,
yeah?
absolutely. Well, we've got two other parts to it. So we've looked at the what, now is the so what. So actually, what is the impact? We're asking, okay, so now I know this about you. What does this look like in practice? And we've broken this down into kind of professional work, learning and comfort. So in professional work, we might be looking at, how do your beliefs change how you work with the people that you serve? What do you need from me to support clear thinking? What is the best way of using our discussions to manage tasks, plan what you'll do, and meet timescales? So looking at actually what are the needs and how can we start to plan to kind of scaffold and meet them. And with learning, it's looking at what actions can I take to aid you in kind of managing learning and supporting development. What is your plan to kind of consider deadlines or multiple needs at once, and what past experience do you have in this, and how this is looking at kind of students as well. How do you balance placement, education and your personal life? Because I think students have it really hard. They're managing so much, and more often than not, students also have a job outside of placement, outside of kind of studying and within their personal life. So they're juggling quite a lot, and that can be a lot for neurodivergent individuals. I just think for anyone generally. And then we look at comfort. So how do you divide your energy between kind of life, education and work? And can you, or what helps you rest while or after you have work? So really looking at that kind of winding down time, and actually how do we replenish energy? Because again, that'll look different for everyone. I know when I was early career, it would be kind of not talking and binge watching TV, because I needed kind of no output and just like minimal input. So that for me was recharging. I know for others it is things like having a nice candle, it's having a conversation with a friend or family member, having a cuddle with their pet as well. And then finally looking at, can you name a time where you have felt not at ease? What was your reaction and what needed to be altered there? So looking at actually kind of what strategies have they put in place, having experienced at the time that they might not have felt comfort or felt stressed. So really trying to draw on past experiences.
I think that's so important, isn't it? Because sometimes people will say to me about supervision that they wonder, my supervisor's asking me so many questions about myself. Now, we've already talked about modeling and sharing your own vulnerability, but sometimes people feel like I'm giving all of this information. But what you're doing there is being really clear about, okay, I've got that information. It doesn't stop there. So what do I do with the information? And I think that's very important because I'm not sure that's always modeled to people. Sometimes they give all of this information, but then that so what stage is almost happening behind the scenes. It's not actually openly discussed. So I really like that and the questions that you use in there.
And I like that it's kind of it's a joint role in figuring out the so what as well, because it's like you said, sometimes we are being asked all of these questions about ourselves and we might not even have some of the answers. So figuring that out together through kind of reflecting on kind of previous similar experiences can help, but also knowing that the conversation doesn't stop in one supervision session, that actually we can check in at the start of every supervision on some of these questions, and where it does happen consistently, it becomes a really normal conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'll take us to the last part, which is
Yes.
kind of resources, the now what. So now we kind of know a bit about you, and we know the impact and kind of what some of the needs are. What are the practicalities that we can do with this? So we have broken this down into some questions, but also some recommendations too. So some of the questions that Jo and I put together were kind of what ways or tools help you arrange your work the best? What signs should I watch for that might mean you need more help? If you are having a hard time, what would be the most useful way for me to act? And what kind of check-ins or feedback would help you? Because sometimes having multiple check-ins a day can be a little bit more jarring than they are helpful. So actually finding out what works for the individual will help build that relationship, and they won't feel like, oh, Florence is checking in again. She's asking the tokenistic question, but is she actually going to do something about it? It's actually kind of that negotiated, what is it that you want? And then we've got the recommendations, so kind of resource examples, which are nothing new, in that we see quite a lot with a lot of different intersecting identities as well. So things like training and awareness, I think is the foundation point of just having a little bit of knowledge about actually what do we need to look out for as supervisors, but also for our colleagues too, and just having a basic understanding of language, or being willing to kind of learn from experts by experience in that space. Organised supervision prep we've got in here, so sharing plans or focused topics. If we know we're going to look at a certain individual that we're working with, actually what kind of probing questions might I ask around it? What are the regular questions that I'm going to ask, especially around kind of like case management, or even around theories, models, legislation? Just having those themes known before supervision can help. And then kind of working at different times as well in terms of resources. There's a theory called spoon theory, that we wake up with a set number of spoons, which I really like to use when working or when supervising. And also knowing that not only do we wake up with a set number of spoons, but actually we might have more spoons at different points in the day. So being able to negotiate, actually, where can I adjust my working day so I'm using the most energy time for work, but also saving some of that energy time for me as well, because it's really important that I don't just give all of myself to work, but also I'm saving some of that for, say, my gardening, for my reading, for my plants and that kind of stuff. So how am I dividing it? And also support in applying for access to work. It's a mountain to climb, and it can have long waiting times, and it's sometimes a confusing process. So just having an ally that will help through the access to work process can make a big change. And then we've got adjustments to kind of learning plans, but also case allocation as well. Can we apply reasonable adjustments in terms of workload reduction, like we see with newly qualified social workers and students? Can we apply that to neurodivergent social workers too? Because we are more often than not putting in a lot of effort and energy to achieve the same amount as someone who might be neurotypical. So actually, can we reduce the load and work at a normal rate and save some of that spoons and reduce some of that stress?
Fabulous. I think, the questions that you're asking and the way that you formatted it as well around the what, so what, now what is actually really helpful. So I'm just thinking about, I know people will want to see and read and understand the model. So is the book out now that you've done the chaptering? Can we, can I put a link in to the video so people can see it? Or
the chapter should be out before Christmas, but I will give you a screenshot. So if you want to flash it on screen, that's absolutely able to do, or even pop a link into it for people to go to in the captions or something.
Yeah, that's what we'll do so that people can see it. Or sometimes people are watching these and then emailing me afterwards saying, where can I get? So as long as I know how to reply, that's the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll need to know that. But I'm sure, it'll be a really helpful piece, because I know, you contributed to Emergence, didn't you, which is Hidden Narratives of Neurodivergent Social Workers. And that's been so incredibly popular. I think just because visibility, as you mentioned earlier, is so important, and people recognizing, look, there are neurodivergent social workers throughout the profession at every stage, and here's some of their thoughts. But also what I find fascinating always about reading that is, as you said, how everybody's experience is different. And I think if somebody comes and says, well, what should we do for neuro-inclusive supervision? Well, you don't just do the same thing for everybody. And that's never going to work. So it's almost like people expect some sort of magic wand, and there isn't. It is about that fundamental relationship building, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Something I just wanted to pick up on, Siobhan, that Florence said when she was sharing the model. Firstly, I should highlight Florence came up with this model, and our chapter just enhances some of the thoughts about it. But it was her idea. One of the things I think supervisors can do is be a better ally. So if I think it isn't just about that supervisee and their needs, but it's about how they influence the organisation and mediate with the organisation and raise the profile of neurodivergence. Hold that in mind when thinking about families and the people that we work with, and how what they might need. So I think allyship is really key to this as well, and something that the gift that a supervisor has to take up allyship.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's such an important point. And also, as you were saying earlier, well, it relates into all areas of supervision. Anti-racism within supervision is all about allyship, isn't it? So I think it is a fundamental role of a supervisor. I think is that allyship, absolutely.
And the other thing, something again that's been highlighted through my conversations with Florence, but something that I probably came to the conversation believing, was the importance of understanding the basics of language and being prepared to grow with its evolution as we know more about it. For me, it's been an education, understanding the nuances of language about neurodiversity, neuronormativity, all of those things. Same with racism, same with any other thing that we're trying to create equity. I think if we can get the basic language right, that goes a really long way to being a good ally and people feeling safe with you.
Yes, absolutely. I suppose what I'd say around that is that's where that curiosity thing comes in,
Mm.
and the bravery, because I do
Mhm.
wonder, I think sometimes some supervisors don't want to discuss certain things because they're worried about getting the language wrong, or they're
Yeah.
worried about having something, raising something that should I raise that. So I think that whole idea of recognizing that sometimes we might be clumsy in some of what we're doing, but
Yeah.
if there is that trust there and that relationship there, that clumsiness can be shared and discussed
Yeah.
and explored. So I
Yeah.
think that's also about bravery, isn't it? And
Yeah. And
lots.
being willing to be imperfect and
Yeah.
modeling that and being willing to apologize and learn.
Hmm.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, some
Mhm.
really fundamental things. So I think that's been a really valuable discussion. I'm hoping people will find it as fascinating as I have. Just even I think sometimes watching a video like this will give people time to almost just pause and think about some of the issues that might matter and just take some time to sort of maybe some of what we'll have done will have guided people's reflection through the session, through the conversation in a way. I don't know. But is there anything that you felt you wanted to say that we haven't said, or is there any? I always like to end supervision, and I've done a slice on how I end supervision with some concluding reflections, I suppose. But I don't know if there's anything that you feel hasn't been shared, or if you want to conclude in any way what our conversation.
I'll conclude with a reflection from the conversation, I think, in kind of the impact and kind of what I felt in this conversation today is the passion to support and the passion to always do better and be able to support at the best. And I think if that is your intention, then being clumsy, like Jo's been saying, is absolutely fine. And we're not perfect. So just lead with your heart as much as possible, and we'll find the way together.
That's nice. I like that, Florence. Um,
Useful concluding reflection, isn't it?
and I was, yeah, I was thinking about the importance of relationship, really. And I think that when it comes to exploring what makes inclusive practice, we have to privilege dialogue over silence. I think it always comes back down to that. So whatever it takes, we have to get into a dialogue,
Mhm.
even if it's messy.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I would completely agree with that. It's silence that does the harm,
Mm.
not talking. I always believe that strongly that so yes, and that's why these conversations really matter. So thank you so much to both of you for joining me and taking the time to taking the time out of your day to have this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
opportunity.
I do hope you've enjoyed today's slice of supervision. Here's how to follow me. See you again soon.